Um, I think this, from my perspective, this starts in 2008 when there was this black hat talk about how one could use BGP to try to create a man-in-the-middle attack. Um, when I was at Renesas in 2013, we discovered what we believe is the first in the wild man-in-the-middle BGP attack coming from Belarus. It used BGP communities to try to shape propagation. So one of the things, if you announce them more specific, you don't want the whole internet to pick it up. Otherwise, you have no way to do a man in the middle. You need to have a clear path back to the intended destination if you want to have traffic redirected to you and then be able to continue on to its destination. So we could see that they were using communities to shape propagation, targeting U.S. financial institutions like Visa, MasterCard, lots of foreign ministries of numerous governments. There was a Wired article about this, and yeah, there's a lot of coverage. So that was, I think, when we started to see some of this determined adversary activity. But as of late, I'd say that a lot of it centers around targeting cryptocurrency services. Cryptocurrency is just catnip for bad actors in the cyberspace, because if they can steal something, they can do it instantaneously. There's no recourse, and it's gone. So it's a great, in that respect, it's a great thing to go after. And going back to April 2018, we saw this Ether wallet attack, and there's the KLAYswap one from 2022. I'll talk about it's the beginning of last year, and then Celer Bridge just happened. We'll talk about each of these incidents. There was actually another one that just took place a few weeks ago for Balancer. If you use that service, that was also subject to an attack. It seemed to be there was a BGP hijack that was involved. There was a hijack of Cloudflare was the authoritative DNS for Balancer. It was hijacked. However, from the report from Balancer, they said that in that case, it was social engineering of their registrar that affected it. So I'm not quite sure if BGP ended up playing a role in the end, but we did see some activity there. Maybe there's more to come on that. So let's just run through these quickly. So, April 28, 2018, this was the incident where there was an attack of this hosting provider in Ohio that then began hijacking Amazon's authoritative DNS, this Route 53. So that's, the service that controls where does a domain point to. And in this case, it was my Ether wallet. So it was a cryptocurrency wallet. It redirected to another, an imposter site that looked identical. It did have a TLS error that the users had to click through and accept the error. So that was, on them, I guess. But if they did log in, then they had their wallet, the cryptocurrency stolen. And then we've seen this evolve from there. This KLAYswap incident from last year was a little bit more complex. So KLAYswap was is a cryptocurrency exchange in South Korea. And the attackers realized that when the page loads, their web services load, it loads a library from another hosting provider in Kakao. And so instead of going after the cryptocurrency exchange directly, they were able to hijack the hosting operator that was serving up this JavaScript library. And when the library was loaded, it contained malicious code that could redirect cryptocurrency. So that was a bit more sophisticated, and some of this, we're starting to get into areas where we may or may not be able to prevent that with existing technologies like RPKI, depending on how far a route needs to propagate. In this case, it just needed to, if let's say you hijack Kakao and it's RPKI invalid, it doesn't propagate very far. The fact that it doesn't propagate very far may not help here if it is the case that the KLAYswap service accepts the bad route. So yeah, this one, there's a lot of discussion going on of how to try to address some of these more sophisticated attacks. And then, the Celer Bridge incident, this one had RPKI involved. So let's talk about that and why that was still successful in spite of RPKI. So this is a service that helps convert between cryptocurrencies, and the attacker performed a BGP hijack against AWS. So they're going right after one of the most sophisticated hosting operations in the world. Um, this was successful. So let's talk about that. So one of the things that the attackers realized was that in order for their bogus announcements to not get filtered by automatically generated whitelist or blacklist or whitelist, excuse me, was they needed to insert bogus route objects into some sort of an RAR service, and so they found that AltDB was one that the security seemed to be pretty low. They were able to trick it into adding route objects for QuickHost, which is this operator in the UK that in the end ended up emanating some of these routes and being important to the attack. So I added these route objects, and what happening is that Aurelion, or formerly Telia, was a transit provider for QuickHost. The attacker realized that Aurelion would build whitelists based on the RARs, including AltDB. So as soon as they could get this record into AltDB, then it would be whitelisted by Aurelion, and then announcement that they announced through QuickHost would propagate out to the internet, and that's what happened. So we saw this AS path here. For those of you who read a lot of BGP, this ought to look maybe a little suspicious here. So you have the origin, you read it right to left. So the origin would be 14618. That is AWS in Northern Virginia. And now it is getting announced by this QuickHost, this 4xAS 209243, and then on to Telia. So at a glance, that's unusual that Amazon would be using this small operator to reach a tier one network, but it was not caught by the Amazon monitoring. So the malicious route, this visualization here is something I like to do where we're just looking at the propagation through time. There was a few different periods it pulsed on, turned off, pulsed on, turned off, and there was a handful of during those periods of time, the attack was was operating and pulling cryptocurrency out of people using this service. And eventually, Amazon caught on. They announced their own route that would compete with the hijack route. Although by the time they did that, the attack was long over. In fact, it was over an hour after the attack was gone. It was when they began to react. So why was this possible? Aside from adding that AltDB record, there was another piece involved. So Amazon had a ROA for the hijack prefix. So why was that? Why did that not help here? My position, although I've gotten pushback from Amazon, is that they have very liberal ROAs. So we mentioned a number of slides ago back in the Allegheny Tech incident when Cloudflare said had Verizon been rejecting invalids, RPK invalids, then they wouldn't have been impacted. I would agree with that. But that was only because the ROAs had a max prefix length, this optional field in a ROA that matched the routes. In this case, they have very liberal ROAs. So for the address space coming out of Amazon, it is allowed to be announced by multiple Amazon ASs, and the prefix range, allowable prefix sizes can go from /10 to /24, which is a pretty huge range. So basically any size is acceptable, and a few different ASs are acceptable as origins. It just creates a lot of room, in my opinion, for an attacker to take advantage of this scenario. And had they had max prefix length matching the routes, it would be very hard for the attacker that would then have to contend with Amazon and fight directly for how far the routes would propagate, and probably would have done less damage.